start and say good morning to everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today for the webinar. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jen, the Head of People Science from the employee voice platform Hive. I'm joined by the brilliant Di Gates, the founder of Connection Heroes. Some of you might have met one of us or both of us before, so special thanks to those who are joining us that we already know. So it's lovely to have you all here. We're here to focus on helping our managers navigate the new world of work. So I feel like I'm personally wearing two hats today. So I'm actually a line manager myself, and I manage a team. One of them is snuck in next to me as well, so I've got to be careful what I say. But I also sit on the wider leadership team at Hive, but then I work closely with managers through the lens of employee engagement and employee voice, which is our focus at Hive. Di also, through her work at Connection Heroes, definitely sees the challenges that managers are facing in today's world of work, particularly around the disconnection and the pressures that managers are under, and sees this a lot in the workshops and support that Di delivers. So between us, we want to bring some really relevant and helpful, hopefully, insights to the table today. We're going to talk about where those pressures are coming from, and hopefully how we can support and begin to ease them and support our line managers. So yeah, thanks for being here. I hope you've got a tea or coffee in hand to settle in. We'll be here for about an hour. And yeah, if we move on to the driver, so we're going to be covering a few key areas. So how the workplace landscape has shifted, and the impact that this has on our managers, what new challenges our line managers are facing as a result, of how we as people leaders can really empower and support them through these changes. So Di's going to kick us off shortly and walk us through some of the biggest changes that we've seen and remind us of some of the biggest changes we've seen in the world of work. Going to be fairly interactive and collaborative between me and Di. We're both talkers. We're genuinely passionate about this, so might have a little bit of a chat as we go through the slides, and we'd love for you to interact too and ask your questions. We might not have time at the end, so please don't wait. If you've got something that you want to ask, drop it into the chat, and if we don't get time in the webinar, we'll follow up afterwards along with the slides recording, and any follow-up materials that we'll reference as we go. So lots to cover. Di, I'm going to hand over to you to get us started.
Perfect. You'll have to excuse me, multitasking is not one of my strengths. I'm admitting people to the meeting whilst getting my slides sorted. So yeah. So helping managers navigate this new world of work. We all know that there's certain ways in which our workplaces have changed pretty radically over the last few years. And I don't think anyone on the call will be surprised by what's changed. But maybe what we haven't done is really spent enough time thinking how these changes impact our managers specifically. So if we look at some of the most obvious changes in our workplace, the first one is in where we work. So half of all employees in the world that can work remotely now do so in some way, some of the time. And that's a massive shift. So what's that mean for our managers? Well, for our experienced managers, first of all, they're the ones that are feeling the biggest pain of this, because they built their whole careers on skills that almost became redundant overnight. You know, I'm speaking with experienced managers who are saying, you know, they used to just be able to really read the room. They used to walk the floor. They were in touch with their team. They could understand by a glance or a nuance or a body movement what was happening, where the issues were. And with the shift to remote working, those skills they almost became redundant overnight. So you've got a lot of really experienced managers just suddenly feeling really vulnerable, a little bit useless, a little bit ill-equipped to deal with this new world of work. And for those managers in that situation who are now having to manage either remote teams or even hybrid teams in particular, that's really challenging for them. And they're at really high risk of starting to practice proximity bias. You know, they're naturally, all of their skills and all of their instincts is going to make them recognize and reward the people that they spend physical time with. And they may have different levels of awareness of whether that's happening. And a lot of the research over the last few years has said this is massive. There's 94% of leaders are admitting that they do this, that they do value and reward the people that they're physically closer to. So it's an obvious change, but massive impact, especially on experienced managers. The other obvious big changes in how we work. So a huge uptake in digital tools. And again, for managers, bless them, you know, they're not just having to get used to using these tools and to supporting their teams, getting used to using these. But what we're finding when we're working with organizations is there's very few rules or guidelines that are set at organizational level. So for example, you know, when should you use email over a Slack channel? How many chat channels should one team have? How should they use them? What's a reasonable response time for a chat message or an email? We're finding time and time again that these rules aren't being set at organizational levels. It's fallen to the managers to have to figure this stuff out. And again, this is new world for them, and it's really challenging. And then a third change, which again feels obvious to us, is the nature of just relationships at work. The way people interact with their colleagues and their managers, their leaders, has changed. And it's not really changing in a positive way. Jen's going to chat through some of this later. People just don't feel connected to their colleagues, and they don't feel trusted by their managers. So again, if you look at what that means for managers, it's really tough, because if their team don't feel engaged, trusted, connected, it's hard enough for them, the managers, to get them to just even deliver business as usual. But either if there's downturns in the market or there's tough times, getting their teams galvanized to stay engaged and stay working hard when they don't feel trusted is really, really hard. Or getting them to do any sort of innovative work, different work, when they're in this disconnected state is really impossible. So it might just be something to think about after today's call, is not just, you'll be familiar with how your work has changed, but really thinking about that, what that means for your managers. And it's a similar story if we look at why the workplace has changed. The RTO mandates happening at the moment are coming thick and strong. And that's because a lot of leaders are just blaming all of these changes on the pandemic. We're rose-tinted glasses. Before 2020, we all worked together. It was brilliant. There were no problems. Bloody pandemic came. We're working from home. That's the root of all evil. And it's just not true. It's a very reductive argument. It's very polarizing. And we can look in detail to lots of reasons why the workplace has changed. And again, we can start to then think, well, how does this impact our managers? And it's only by really understanding this problem space that we can really deliver kind of supportive solutions. So why is the workplace changed? Well, one reason why workplaces are so different and feel so different is the decline in job tenure. Back in the 80s, we had a really strong concept of, job for life, workmates for life. But that's been in decline since the 80s. People just switch jobs way more regularly now. What does that mean for managers? Well, managers, as well as dealing with those changes, they're having to deal with much more regular changes within the people of their own team. So lots more time needed for onboarding, for managing the integration, for managing exits, for managing the culture change that happens when new people join and old people leave, and the knowledge exchange and the skill base and the experience base they've got. This decline in job tenure is having an immediate and pretty massive impact on managers. Similarly, we've seen over the last decade, so it might change given emerging regulations, but we've seen a massive rise in the gig economy and 0 hours contract. And there's a couple of things here for managers. The first is this has given rise to a different outlook at work, a different way that people think about work, much more transactional, less relational. So managers, again, experienced managers are seeing a different type of attitude coming in the people in their teams. But also if they're managing kind of 0 hours contract colleagues, they're going to see people who perhaps aren't as invested in developing relationships with the rest of the team. They're going to see people who perhaps aren't invested in mid or long-term goals for the organization or the team, because they're not going to be part of that. And if your managers are managing teams where there is a mixture of 0 hours and fixed-term full-time contracts, that's even harder, because you're going to have a clash of culture and priorities between those two types of workers. And again, it's the managers that are the coalface of that, haven't deal with it. So again, if that's something in your organization, it's worth thinking about the impact on your managers. Digital transformation we've referenced, but we didn't just start using tech at the pandemic. That was only 5 years ago. We're using, I've got a couple more people joining. We've been using kind of technology, and technology has been driving change in our workplace for decades. But the big kind of challenge for managers is it's not, again, like I said, the number of tools and setting the rules. It's the fact that digital transformation is speeding up radically, especially at the moment with the adoption of AI. The rate of change and the impact of that change, it's changing how organizations run. It's changing the pace at which people are expected to work. It's changing the expectations and the KPIs that teams are getting set. And managers not only have to try and support their teams through that change, but they're human too, and they've got to manage that change. And we'll look a little bit later on. I think humans, we're pretty crap at change. It scares us, and we go into lockdown, but we get more combative. So digital transformation, again, it's having a big impact on the role of managers. And then finally, the key thing it's driven and changed attitudes towards work is conversations and concept of work-life balance, which started back in the sort of mid-90s started gaining traction, where people just weren't prepared for work to take up as much of their lives as we used to. So for a lot of managers, you know, I'm 47 now. My attitude to work is very, very different to a lot of younger people coming into the workplace. So again, experienced managers are finding a challenge, a bit of a culture conflict between how they grew up through work and how they felt about work, and you know, the attitude of they've got to suspend judgment of this different attitude of coming through. And we're finding that a lot of managers are they're taking on extra workload, and they're sacrificing their own flexibility in order to protect that of their team. And that's clearly not sustainable. So yeah, there's loads of reasons why the workplace has changed. And the impact of all of this is managers are they're at the coalface of almost every aspect of employee experience, of employee engagement. Much more kind of like responsibility for relationship building with their team. And Jen, I know this is kind of something you guys look a lot at the element of employee engagement. I think you've got some stats, haven't you, to just back up the level of this impact?
Yeah, definitely. And it all really resonates. I definitely prefer the term experienced manager than an older manager, elder millennial, or whatever we get referred to as. But yeah, definitely feel a lot of that. And it definitely has shifted. And I think when you break it down like that, it does make you stop and think that it's no wonder that managers are really feeling this so strongly. There's just so much change being happening all the time. It's completely constant. And so it's no surprise that it's starting to show up in a few different ways. So we've already kind of hinted towards it, but Di and I are going to focus on two areas in particular, thinking about employee voice and engagement and connection, because that's where we're seeing these pressures come through the most. So in my part next, I just want to dig into how these changes that we've been talking about are affecting managers when it comes to how they lead and engage their teams. I'm sure you've probably heard quite a lot. It's been spoken about a lot this year. Gallup's research, you know, they've done loads around engagement over the years, and I know I feel some of their stats do get repeated a lot, but one thing I do value about them is how consistent and large scale their data is. It does give us a solid foundation to work from. And one stat that always kind of resonates with me is 70% of the difference in engagement levels within a team comes down to the line manager, which is huge. So basically we're saying if a team's engaged, the biggest reason for that is their line manager, and conversely, if they're not engaged, then it's down to their line manager. So that's quite a lot of weight for one person to carry. And I think crucially, the sort of main thing to note is line management engagement has been dropping, particularly for female and younger line managers. And even now, 2/3 of line managers apparently don't even want to manage teams anymore. And Gen Z have been saying that they don't really want to step into those roles. So it feels like we're in a bit of a crisis here. And we know that people don't leave organizations, they leave managers. So we're putting a lot onto this group, and they deserve the right tools and support to get it right. So yeah, I'm going to dig into this a little bit more and see how that is actually showing up in the work we're doing at Hive. So this is our data, and one thing that's really kind of positive is engagement is now being seen as a business-wide priority. So over half of organizations now say that engagement is company-wide focus, which is great, and that really takes us away from the days where it was just seen as an HR function and part of an HR manager's roles and responsibilities. And more than half of line managers actually see this as being really important too. However, the data we have is telling us that only 1/4 of line managers are actually championing it. And what we hear is when we're talking to organizations, we often hear things like, oh, some managers are really great at engagement and some not so much. And it is rarely by design. It usually comes down to chance. You'll have some managers who are naturally great with people, and we've got others who are promoted based on their technical strengths and not necessarily their people skills. So on the one hand, we're saying engagement's everyone's job, but we're not always setting managers up to lead on it successfully, and we're almost just leaving it to chance. The second thing is most organizations are lacking clear goals for engagement. So we have noticed a shift on this, that when organizations start working with us, only 16% of them actually have already established clear goals around engagement. So if that was left unchecked, that would mean the majority would be kicking off their engagement efforts without a clear sense of what that success would look like or how it connects to the wider business priorities. So that's actually a really tough spot for managers to be in. On the one hand, they're being told to lead on something, but then it's still really quite vague from the top down. So that's obviously having an impact on them. And then even with good intentions, feedback isn't always acted on. So we do have organisations who are regularly sending out surveys. Lots are doing that, but half of them are telling us that they're not consistently acting on the feedback. Now, when we dig into that, it's usually internal blockers, slow processes, rigid systems, decision-making bottlenecks, or things that are perceived to be conflicting priorities, which will make it harder for them to follow through. However, because when when feedback is given by the employee and nothing happens, that's where trust breaks down. And 45% of employees are telling us that they don't feel confident that their feedback is actually being acted on. And it's usually the line manager who bears the brunt of that frustration, even if those blockers are outside of their control. And that's the key thing here. Quite often those blockers are out of their control. When we speak with line managers who want to make changes, they feel like they can't always act because they don't have the empowerment or the accountability, but often they don't even have access to their own team's engagement results, which feels pretty wild to me because on the one hand, we've got senior leaders, when we meet with them, they're like, oh, our managers are empowered to act. And I'm sure they want them to be, but the reality is that empowerment doesn't always translate through to line managers. And it's often more about it's often not about mindset and the want to do it. It's about the structures that we've got in place, like systems, clunky processes, layers of bureaucracy to get anything done. So even those 25% of motivated managers are being blocked from doing what they know needs to be done. We are seeing lots of progress in this, and I think this year we've probably seen the most shift in managers actually being given access to their survey data and insights. But we are still hearing a bit of a hesitation there. And I've come from an HR background. I do get I know when things can go wrong and how hard it is and how hard it makes our job. But we've got people in these roles, they're trusted with big budgets, they're trusted to lead major projects, they're delivering learning, healthcare, customer experiences, and they get the tools and the support and training in those areas. So not so much when it comes to supporting and engaging their own team. So we have to really think about that when it comes to what we can do for them. And I think my final point on this is just that there can sometimes be a bit of a disconnect between what leaders expect and what's actually possible. And I'm sure in your own role, you probably find that as well. Sometimes senior leaders are that little bit removed from the day-to-day realities of things. So they think it's easy, see the data, make a change, job done. But they're not always aware of legacy systems and processes, organizational history that managers are also trying to deal with, and all of the other day-to-day complexities. And I often find in organizations, we just add complexity into what we're doing, and we don't stop and think about, what's realistic to expect for a manager. So why does this matter? It's managers are being asked to lead on engagement, but they're not always given the data, the support, the time, or the shared understanding of what success looks like. And then obviously when feedback isn't acted on, it's the manager-employee relationship that's suffering first. So good news is it is making progress. We are making progress, but we've still got lots of things that we can do. So we'll come back to solution mode shortly. But for now, I'm going to hand back over to Di, who's going to talk us through how this new way of working is also affecting managers when it comes to those crucial employee connections and team connections. Thanks, Di.
We're a bit doom-mongery this morning, aren't we? It all seems like pretty bleak out there.
Yes, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Connection Heroes, we're in the business of helping organisations improve human connection, levels of trust, making sure people feel seen, heard, valued, trusted by their colleagues. And the reality is that doesn't happen by default anymore for all of the reasons that we looked at, the different attitudes, the way we're working. And so when organisations, by coming to work with us, they're already saying, right, we value human connection and we know we need to improve it. So the next exercise that we take, all of the managers that we work through and all the cohorts that we deliver, we say to them, why does connection matter to you as an individual? Why does human connection matter here in this organisation, in this team? And then critically, what stops it? What are the things that happen in your organisation, the people issues or the process issues that just block connection. They might dismantle trust. They might make people feel not valued. There might be things that just prevent deep, authentic relationships developing. And we call these connection blockers. So I'm just going to share some of the connection blockers that groups have shared with us. And these run across different sectors, different sizes of organizations. They tend to run across even whether someone's kind of an organization is fully remote or hybrid. I'm just going to share some of these and maybe look at, again, the impact on managers. So the first thing that a lot of people tell us about, which is really stopping deep connections forming, is the fact that so many people in work are just avoiding hard conversations, difficult conversations. They're just stepping out of the way. So for managers, that shows up, for example, in they're just telling us they don't feel confident to give feedback, to give critical feedback, especially to those members of their teams that they don't know that well. And that's obviously difficult because it's inhibiting learning and development opportunities if their team members aren't getting feedback that they need. But it's also creating inequality, because if they're giving quality feedback, critical feedback to people that they know, but not to the newer members of the team or the people that are working remotely, that's clearly going to, it creates an inequality that kind of drives a sense of things not being fair, which is then going to, end up in a drop of respect for the manager and a whole world of problems. And the other sort of conversation that we're seeing managers not stepping up to is challenging, either challenging leaders on inappropriate behavior or challenging decisions, not in an arsey way, but just, having that psychological safety to step up and challenge. It's not happening. And again, the knock-on effect, that's modeling a sort of behavior that their team is then going to adopt as well. So yeah, what's happening in our workplace and what's happening in your workplaces, are managers stepping up to have the hard conversations, or are they avoiding them? Something we've seen a lot of, and it's sometimes articulated, but even if it's not articulated, when we talk about it, lots of people recognize it, which is just this increase in just polite, nice behavior between colleagues. So we don't want to bother, we don't want to cause a fuss. Managers are prioritizing harmony over honesty. And again, it's just preventing deep, authentic relationships from developing. And if it's the managers that are modeling this behavior, again, it's creating a culture where it's almost impossible to establish true psychological safety, because no one's being their true selves, no one's voicing their true opinion, we're all just stepping back. And I think that's an impact especially we're seeing it more in the fully distributed workplaces where people are sort of hiding behind a screen. So it's really managers have got a key role to play to sort of step beyond that, recognize that kindness and politeness are two very different things. Tools and tech, every group that we work with tells us that although the tools and technology might assist and be effective in delivering work, they are not being used effectively to build relationships. They are used for very transactional, functional communications, and by placing 80 or 90% of all of our colleague interactions being tool driven, that means that 80 to 90% of our transactions are functional or transactional. So we're not creating space to build those relationships, to build empathy, to build understanding, to get to know each other. And again, everybody on the call now will understand how important that is if we want to do any kind of meaningful, innovative work. So real connection blocker. And this one comes up again in virtually every group that we work with. And due to all of those factors that we looked at earlier and the way that work runs now, there's no just serendipity, there's no chance meetings, there's no just bumping into a colleague from a different department. And there's lots of impacts from that. So it means that individuals, there's no knowledge exchange beyond your own team. There's no innovation which can happen at the cusp of two different skill areas. And it means that individuals are just speaking with the same people about the same things time and time again. So you end up with micro cultures developing. There's no ability to see the bigger picture. And for managers, again, the danger is that they're reinforcing that because of the overwhelm, because of how much they've got on their plate now. It's almost that if it's not about their team, if something doesn't impact their team, it's not their problem. So they're looking introspective. They just because they can't handle anything else than that oftentimes. But again, that's a behavior modeling which really reinforces these silos. So it's pretty dangerous. This next one, I don't know why I've got this as number 5. This should be number 1. We're all really crap at having online meetings, really crap. And actually, because most of our meetings now are online, that's driving the way we're running even offline meetings. So even when we all get face to face, they're a little bit crap. And it's usually managers, people managers, team managers, project managers who lead most of the meetings. You know, and what we're hearing is meetings could be a real opportunity to build connection, to get to know each other, but they're not being used in that way at all. They're usually ill-planned in terms of giving people time to really understand and think ahead of a meeting, because there's no agenda shared. There's not always enough attention given to who needs to be in that meeting. So too many of the wrong people and not enough of the right people. In the meetings themselves, the loud voices are the ones that tend to be prioritised. So if you're a thinker or a reflector or a planner, your voice isn't getting heard. Rarely are meetings effectively followed up with space to reflect and feedback. So for all myriad of reasons, we really do need to help our managers get better at meetings. Meetings are this real opportunity to prioritise connection across the team. And it's from what we're hearing when we're working with groups, it's just not happening, which means this is happening. Okay, what a lot of people are telling us, that the biggest blocker of connection, the thing that stops them creating potentially really good, strong, effective relationships, is the fact that these silos are deepening. And they're deepening for all of the reasons that we've said. You know, that team managers are setting rules of communication and engagement just for their team. So if you're in team A and you favour chat channels, and your expectation is that a chat channel will be responded to by the end of the day, and you're communicating with team B who prefer email, and their expectation is as long as you get back to an email by the end of the week, the culture difference between those two working environments is almost unsurmountable. So managers are navigating all of these kind of connection blockers that are just stopping developing the sort of relationships that we need. So again, kind of after today, some of these you might recognize and see them, but you might have different blockers at play. So, you know, get out there and ask and listen and find out what the blockers are. Because if these aren't addressed, they especially the avoiding hard conversations and the politeness, they become entrenched. And if we've got managers modeling these behaviors, it's going to be on a downward spiral. But that is all very downward spiral. It's the end of the tunnel. Jen, should we think we should kind of like maybe
start lifting everybody back up? Yeah, shouldn't we?
All doomed. Everybody hates each other. We'll just all, you know.
Yeah, it is all, to be fair, you know, it is all true, and we're seeing it in survey results as well, like the sort of subcultures that are happening across different teams, and the rhymes and reasons for it all link into the things that you're hearing about, things that are causing connection blockers as well. But we do want to make sure that you're actually getting something other than a bit of a moan and a bit of hopefully it'll have resonated and it'll have felt cathartic, but we do want you to actually take some stuff away from this as well, and leave not feeling as overwhelmed as we might have just made you feel there with everything. So we are going to start looking at ways in which we can respond to this, and give you some simple takeaways. We don't want you to feel like, again, we don't want to be the ones piling on. So this is just some small tweaks and changes that you can make, or things we can think about that will hopefully make a big difference. So I'm going to kick us off, and then Di will take us through some of hers as well. So if we go on to next slide, please, driver. Thank you. So we're going to start with the first area, which is I've got as listening and act, but it's really about creating goals, listening and acting. So this is how we listen to our manager population and use that insight to drive change. And again, it's not about adding to the already full plates of our line managers. It's about redefining what success looks like and helping them lead well without burning out in the process as well. So we'll start off with some clear goals. So gone are the days, I think, where we can just measure employee engagement because it's the right thing to do. We all know that, but the world of work has changed, and with it, the expectations of our leaders have shifted too. So to get real traction now at C-suite or senior exec level, we need to show that employee voice has a much broader business impact. It's not just a nice fluffy HR thing and a nice to have. So we understand why this matters, but it's our jobs now really to connect the dots for others at every layer of the organisation. And for our exec teams, it's often those tangible goals, especially anything linked to a clear financial outcome. They're the ones that get their attention the most. But I'm not trying to say that we should only look at things that impact financial outcomes. We shouldn't lose sight of the more anecdotal, qualitative outcomes too. They're still important. So because we found that when orgs come to us, they 15-16% only really have those clear goals in place already around employee voice. We've created an employee voice to business impact framework, and this is something that we will be sharing with you after the session. So I'm not going to go through this in too much detail. You don't have to work with Hive to use it. It's free to use and apply in your own context. But this framework will hopefully help bring this work to life. It'll translate those broader outcomes, like we want to build trust, engagement, belonging, into something that feels really real and tangible for those business benefits. It's designed to help you make the case to your exec in a language that hopefully will resonate more with them. You might have execs who speak the same language, but if you don't, hopefully we can translate. And then it's just about sort of creating that great starting point for building alignment, and hopefully helping our line managers understand why this matters and how their role connects to the bigger picture. So when they don't have those clear goals, that can be problematic to sort of, you know, get them to, if it doesn't feed into their KPIs, then, you know, they might not see the value in it. What gets measured gets done by managers, and when they're already busy, we need to make it really clear what the expectations are. So that's kind of part one for us. Part two is listening to your line managers. So there's loads of different ways we can listen to our manager population. So many tools available to us, and you probably have some of your own already. And obviously, as a tech provider, it would be really easy for me to say, send a survey. And in some cases, if you've got low psychological safety or loads of managers that you want to tap into, it could be a good starting point. But for most of us, I think surveys aren't always going to create the space for that thoughtful discussion or deep listening. And without that, change is unlikely to happen. So we often spend a lot of time with our employee populations, understanding their needs and wants. How many of us have actually spent some time with our line manager population, really understanding what's creating pressure for them? So I want to introduce you to a bit of a different tool that we use in our workshops. This is called the pressure performance curve. And we usually actually just pile this straight onto managers and say, you use it with your own teams. But actually, it's a really powerful listening tool for managers themselves. So the principle is we all need a little bit of pressure to perform, but too much leads to overwhelm and stress, potentially burnout at the real extreme of it, and not enough pressure with no goals, no clear expectations can really slow us down. So we use this curve as a bit of a visual conversational tool. Managers map out parts of their role that put them into that high pressure zone or low pressure zone, or the ideal zone where they feel like they can be focused, motivated and effective. And then we'll ask them to identify systems, situations or processes that are contributing to each zone. That's a great way to uncover any blockers and often get to the truth of things that we didn't even realize were there, things that we thought were historical and weren't being done anymore, those kind of things. And then once we've listened to them, we can really start to act. It's also a tool that managers of managers can use. So if you've got some really senior leaders in the team that you can get using this, that would be great, because sometimes when it comes to things like blockers, they're the really good ones at being able to say, oh no, we don't need to be doing that, or they can take things off their plates as well. I'll share, that was a bit of an overview, but I'll share this exercise with the full facilitation notes after the webinar, if you're interested in using it in your organization. And then finally, it's act. So if we truly listen to our managers during that phase, hopefully we'll feel inspired to act. But empowering them to take the lead on actions is far more effective than relying on top-down directives. So it is a challenge to sometimes move from what feels like HR-owned initiatives to ones that are truly manager-led. But I think that's really crucial if we want that buy-in and if we want to start changing that narrative about where this is driven by. We need managers to feel included and respected in the decision-making process. So that's where the trust and confidence in this is built. So one simple tool that we use is just a positional question called, which is phrased, how might we? Probably heard of it before, but it's widely used in innovation, design thinking, and it really helps to reframe challenges as opportunities. So we would often follow up from the pressure performance curve with a how might we chat chart, where managers will share their written thoughts in response to prompts like the example ones we're seeing on the slides, like how might we help managers build strong connections that boost team engagement within their teams. And again, we'll share the facilitation guidance. So in a nutshell for me, create the goals to make it make sense and make sure that it links into the manager's actual priorities, because if we don't, then it'll just become another one of those things that will drop aside when operational things become busier. We need to listen to our managers, and not just as part of the general population. We need to listen to them separately and really understand all of the challenges we've identified, which of those are showing up for them. And then we need to empower them to act on and make some of those changes as well. And we'll share all of those with you in a bit more detail after the webinar.
Cheers, Jen. That'd be great. I think that kind of the pressure performance chart looks a really useful tool. I think visualizing anything, doesn't it, really helps people not feel alone with these challenges, which is so important.
Yeah.
And then moving that, and I love that concept of shifting from kind of problem or challenge through to kind of opportunity, which is what this kind of statement, the How Might We statement, does. And I guess the outcome of that is kind of maybe some money plans, some ideas, some ways in which we could deal with some of these challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's from that's when we can kind of hone down into one or two things that we can do that are going to have the biggest impact. That exercise typically draws out lots of ideas. There's loads we can do, but it's about what's actually going to have an impact, what's going to be the easiest to implement, and it really draws out those conversations and things that we can take real action on.
Definitely. And I guess the flip side of that then is, in terms of how we support our managers to implement, is making sure they've got the skills.
Yeah,
the skills. And I think the latest report that came out, which I was reading a couple of weeks ago, it said, I think it was 92%, I'll find the source and I'll share it after, of HR leaders don't feel that their current management and leadership development programs are equipping their managers with the skills that they need for sort of today and tomorrow's workforce, which is the skills that they need to help managers boost on connections, to help managers reduce the pressure, investors balancing well-being. So we do need to look at the skills and the training that we're providing our managers. And our kind of area of expertise is what we call connection skills. So these are the skills that managers need to keep their teams feeling seen, heard, valued, trusted in this fast-changing, distributed workplace that we're in. And all of the training and the workshops that we do, at the core of them, we have a core strengths framework that we'll look at in the middle in a minute. But before we even get onto those connection core strengths, it's really important. I think all managers can benefit from this. And again, I can share content about this after the webinar. We help managers develop what we call a connection mindset. And that is one where they intentionally prioritize human connection with their team in their day-to-day behaviors. So it's not them doing more things, it's just them doing things slightly different in a way that pays a bit more attention to the fact that all of their team presumably are human. And the reason we do this is because if we want within our organizations to prioritize more connection, then as humans, we only ever prioritize the things that we value. And we only ever value the things that we understand. So helping our managers and our leaders understand a little bit more about our sort of human operating model, about how our brains and our nervous system works, and how that affects how their team members feel, how they think, how they behave to each other. This is a really important part of knowledge and understanding that can help with the fact that they are now at the coalface of employee experience. They've got so many more relational human management elements that are part of their role than ever before. We need a bit of grounding in it. So we're not going to deep dive into this today. And I know a couple of you were on the last webinar when we talked about this, but a lot of our training and our workshops will open up at some point with this kind of picture. What we're really saying here is, if we can understand a little bit more about what motivates our behavior in the workplace, then as managers, we can be a bit more in tune, and we can help drive our own behaviors in ways that lead to better teamwork and collaboration. And we can help our team members do the same. So if we look at that red zone there, this primitive brain, a lot of people in the workplace are operating there at the moment because work is feeling more stressful, more changeable, just harder, more challenging than it ever has done before. And we go into that red zone when we feel at threat, when we feel a little bit unsafe, when we feel a little bit uncertain, if we feel that our sort of place in the tribe is not as secure as it should be. And there's various things in workplace that can make team members go into that red zone brain. So it might be, you know, continuous change, either in processes or people, can make people feel uncertain, can drive people into that red zone. Excuse me. Look at those experienced managers who suddenly find that the skills that they've built their careers on are no longer relevant. It's going to make me feel kind of defensive. It's going to make me push into that red zone. Maybe I might be triggered into the red zone because I've done a piece of work and I haven't had any feedback on it. And that level of uncertainty is driving me mad because I think I've done a bad job and no one's prepared to tell me because everyone's too polite. That's going to drive me into the red zone. Maybe someone has given me feedback, it's just been really ill delivered and it's really affected me. So there's loads of reasons why a manager's team could end up in that primitive brain. So whatever gets them in there, the reality is once you're there, it's very self-centered and you can get locked in it. And you've got cortisol and adrenaline, the stress hormones pumping around your body. They're putting you into fight or flight mode, or they're putting you into freeze and appease mode. So you might, if you go into fight mode, you might see your team members being, you know, aggressive or combative. Or if they've gone into kind of freeze mode, they might just bury their head in the sand because they're trying to protect themselves. But however we react in that red zone, it ain't good for teamwork. It ain't good for connection. It ain't good for engagement, for productivity, for collaboration. It's not where we want our managers and their teams to be. But the good news is we can override it. We can, not always easily, and it takes practice, but we can learn to recognize when we're in that state and to pull ourselves through into this green zone. And we can do that through the language we use to ourselves, through breathing techniques, through mindfulness. There's lots of stuff which might feel a bit hippie and alien to a lot of managers, but you know, if they get why this matters, they get more on board with it. But we can use techniques to bring us into this front part of our brain where we push out a whole different type of neurochemical, which alters how we feel and therefore how we act. So we get serotonin, which just chills us out a bit, calms us down, gives us chance to see maybe the opportunities rather than the barriers. We got oxytocin, which is our connection neurochemical, which helps us build trust, helps us connect. We're able, because we're not feeling a threat, we can ask for help, we can admit if we don't know something, we can probably challenge a little bit better. Much better team behavior can happen in here. We can collaborate, we can communicate more effectively. And so just understanding some of this basic neuroscience of how we're hardwired and how that impacts the sort of behaviors we see in our team, even just giving managers, I think everyone in an organization would benefit from this, but learning how we operate, because this is regardless whether we're sitting next to each other, we've got a screen between us. This stuff predates, isn't ever since humans had a brain, this drives our behavior. It doesn't suddenly change because we're on Zoom a lot. So giving our managers some understanding of this can be really helpful to them in dealing with all of these much more relational, human-y, people-y bits that are now part of their role. And they also provide a really good basis for what we call these core strengths. And these are a blend of mindset, skill set, and tool set. So ways of thinking, ways of doing, and tools that we can use to do better. And these are the sort of skills that we're seeing or the managers need now if they want that, what is it, 25% Jen actively want to help engagement?
Yeah, 25%.
Yeah, so they need these skills. They're ready to have these skills. The other 75%, there's a bit of a journey first for them to understand maybe why it's part of their role and where they're at. You know, there's some groundwork to do before they can start really building on these skills. But these are the skills that they need to really drive and improve connection across the team. So, you know, I won't go through all of them now, but you know, we can teach and train your managers to build trust, to improve trust. That usually takes two tracks that we talk about in sessions. One is showing them and giving them tools to practice vulnerability, because if they're able to be vulnerable, that's a behavior that models that says we're human, we make mistakes, we don't know things sometimes, that's okay. And the other track in building trust is really practicing gratitude effectively. So it's not just saying thanks for a job well done. It's saying thank you inclusively, making sure people get thanked for the things they do, the impact of that, the way people show up. It's delivering that gratitude in a timely fashion, in a way that works for the individual. There's a lot of kind of basic psychology that can really improve the way team managers can build trust. Pick another couple. Communicate and collaborate brilliantly. Again, that one's a bit more pragmatic. So what these core strengths do is they apply the sort of the neuroscience of human connection and some basic kind of positive psychology, but they apply that understanding to solve practical problems of the distributed workplace. So communicate and collaborate brilliantly. We can teach design thinking. We can teach agile techniques that allow managers to ideate with their teams, to collaborate with their teams, to prioritize with their teams, regardless of physical location. We can teach managers, and they can teach their teams to be radically responsible. So to take ownership of any unconscious bias, like proximity bias that might be at play, to use tools like the radical candor framework so that they're not avoiding those difficult conversations, so they can bravely tell the truth to help people develop. So there's lots of ways in which we can really develop skills to give them, develop managers to give them the skills that they need. But as with all skills and any training, the challenge really, isn't it, is in finding ways to embed those new skills and embed that knowledge in actual day-to-day behaviours. And that's where rituals come in. So the third thing that you can do to potentially support your managers is to look at any team rituals, connection rituals that you can encourage your managers and their teams to do that will really put the focus on engagement, on connection, on the fact that we're all human and we're all in quite a difficult, changeable boat together. And won't it be better if we understand each other and support each other as a team? And the nice thing about rituals is they're not big process changes. They're not big kind of like operational procedures that need to go through HR. These are things that managers do anyway. They do anyway, but we're saying, can we do them in a slightly different way that's just going to deepen connection? Or can we do them in a slightly different way so that everybody on your team feels engaged instead of just a few that can speak out loud on a call? And these team rituals allow us to kind of embed stuff in the day-to-day without asking our managers to do more. Now, it could be that some of these would work tomorrow in your organization. You can start doing them straight away. Or it might be that if you're going to have your own conversations in your own workplaces with, hey guys, why does connection matter? And what are the things that are blocking it? Once you've got a list of those connection blockers from your own, then you can go on to co-design some of your own connection rituals. I'll just share a few that have come out through the course of our training so far. The first is this concept of say no to 60, which is the idea that we should ban 60-minute meetings. Just say no to them. Because if we've got so many back-to-back meetings, which as we've seen are badly run, we're just permanently in this red zone. We've not got time to reflect. We've not got time to consider. We've not got time to prepare. We're just back to back to back to back, and we're permanently in this red zone. So we're never fully engaged. We're never fully connected because we're getting driven by the wrong neurochemicals. So just say no to 60-minute meetings. Ban them. Make them 55 only. F Up Friday is another. I love this one. So again, most teams have an end of week wrap up meeting anyway. Most managers get their team on and you have a natter about what you're going to have for tea that night or what you're going to have at the weekend, what you're doing at the weekend. Instead of that, maybe you have an F Up Friday session where everybody on that team, starting with the manager, just says something that they've totally dropped that week, something that they've totally effed up, makes them human. And again, you're just establishing that psychological safety that, you know, modeling that it's okay to be vulnerable and that we all make mistakes. I love that's my favorite. A Monday mood check. Again, let's prioritize connection and the fact that we're all human at the very start of the week. So again, most managers will have some sort of Monday morning stand up or check in with their team. Just kick it off to see how everybody is, but make it genuine. So if you're going to do like an emoji check-in, say, you know, what food are you feeling like today, or what weather do you feel like? If you do the weather emoji, you can't just expect everyone to put sunshine up. No, you've got to expect that some people will be rainy, some people might be lightning strikes, and that's fine. You've got to allow everybody to show up as they are if you're going to ask them, or don't ask. Just don't fake it. Don't do that polite thing where everyone just puts a sunshine or maybe a tiny cloud. And as a manager, they've then got to kind of say, okay, so if someone does put rain or does put like a storm, what do I do about that? What's the best way for me to check in and follow up with that person? Do I give them a call? Do I just give them a message? Do I check in? Do I let them know that I'm ready when or if they want to talk? So again, you're stretching managers to just think that little bit more about the humans on their team, and the benefits are proven. No double dipping. This came back from one of the larger organizations that we work with. They were Building Society, and they said the managers, when they put meetings on, they were so lazy, they would just invite, like they couldn't think who on a team would be the best person to invite. So they'd just lazily invite 2 or 3 people or 4 people from the same team. It's a complete waste of resource. And you're not going to get engaged because you know you're not there because you specifically have been requested, just someone from your team. So no double dipping is basically forcing people to say you can only invite one person from any one team. So the manager's got to do the hard work and think that through. And then finally, the chaos candle is another great one. So we work with an organisation who the managers were really empowered, but once a month, the directors of the business would go and have a check-in with those managers and review their projects. But the managers really felt under the cosh. They felt really threatened by those meetings because their perception was this wasn't a director just stepping in to be friendly and give some ideas. They thought that they were much more directive meetings. They thought that the directors were coming in, telling them what to do. And as a result of that meeting, all chaos would ensue because they'd have to change what they were doing, to change their approach, do things differently. And that came out in one of the workshops, and the directors were gutted. They were absolutely gutted that that's how the managers felt. That wasn't their intent whatsoever. So it just kind of, they ended up laughing about it and saying, oh my God, we've been at such cross purposes here. Those meetings were really chaotic for us, whereas the directors were thinking, oh, I've just been really helpful. That was really good, crack on. So they actually ordered and bought on Etsy some chaos candles. So now whenever those monthly meetings happen, they just make a joke of it and light the chaos candle and prepare. But that chaos doesn't ensue anymore because they now understand where each of them's coming from. So none of those are new work to do. They're all just looking at situations, things that managers do anyway, and saying, is there anything we can do there to either fix connection, dial it up, or allow people to get back into that green zone so we've got a cat in hell's chance of actually connecting. Jenna, I don't know if you've got any ones that you guys do at Hive.
Yeah, definitely. So my team used to be all in the office, and then when the pandemic hit, we kind of went to more of a remote first type of work. And actually now it's only me that's ever in the office. So it's a fully remote team. And I definitely know that you've got to be much more intentional around making connections. And when I first came back from maternity leave last year, we were having the team meetings, which we do once a month, and getting everybody face to face for that. Previously, the meetings had been set up with a huge commercial focus, and that was really, could have been really damaging to the connection pieces and the kind of the mood and the buzz. So we kind of shifted that to take the commercial bits out and focus those meetings for getting together on connecting, on collaborating, celebrating wins and celebrating like personal successes and anniversaries, birthdays, that kind of thing. Collaborating and being creative, and try to kind of take the sort of commercial lens out of it so that we could just focus on spending that time together. And we definitely feel like we get a lot more out of it. I love FO Friday. I think we might incorporate that into the future. But I'm now feeling a bit of pressure on saying no to 60 because I kind of
I know. Yeah.
Practice what we preach, isn't it? So, so I'll just quickly wrap up. And if there's any questions, just stick them into the chat now, and we'll come back to you. But hopefully, they've all felt like an effective way to apply what you've learned from listening, and feel able to put some new skills into practice through all of the things that we've talked about. So when it comes to taking action, so reminders. What changes are most challenging to your managers? So we've talked about loads, but it is all generic insight. So please make sure that you actually speak to your own managers and understand what changes are challenging them the most. Understand for the same purpose, what are their biggest connection blockers, and then think of the 3 actions that you feel like you will be able to take first, that listening and acting, skills and rituals. So which of those do you think you will be able to sort of take forward from the meeting? We've really enjoyed having you here today. Unfortunately, if we want to have a sort of a minute to go and have a quick toilet break or make a coffee before our next meetings, we probably don't have any time for some questions now. But please, if you're not already connected to me and Di on LinkedIn, connect with us on LinkedIn. And if you've got any follow-up questions or anything, please share them. We will share the recording and all of the follow-up materials with you, either immediately straight after or in a week or so's time for a couple of them, but we will share all of the materials. So just want to say a big thank you to everybody for joining us. And yeah, have a lovely rest of day and rest of week for those who are sticking around till Friday.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.